The envelope arrived 3 days before Christmas. Thick cream-colored, my name printed in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. I remember standing in the narrow hallway of my apartment, keys still in my hand, the smell of burnt coffee lingering from that morning, staring at it longer than necessary. I knew before I opened it that it was from my parents. They always sent cards for Christmas, even during the years we barely spoke. But something about the weight of it, the stiffness, made my stomach tighten. I carried it to the small kitchen table by the window. Outside, snow drifted down onto the fire escape, soft and quiet, the city muffled the way it always was in December. Inside, the radiator clicked and hissed. I slit the envelope with a butter knife. The card inside was simple. A winter scene, pine trees dusted with snow, a house glowing warmly from inside. No signature on the front. I opened it. "From now on, please do not contact us anymore." That was it. No dear. No explanation. Just that single sentence written neatly, evenly, like it had been drafted, discussed, approved. Then something slid out of the card and onto the table. A folded cashier's check. I stared at it, my mind slow, stubbornly refusing to connect meaning to shape. When I unfolded it, the number jumped out at me. $20,000. I laughed once. It came out sharp and ugly like a bark. The sound echoed in the small room and then disappeared. My chest felt hollow, as if someone had scooped something out of me and left only air. For a long moment, I didn't move. I sat there, my fingers resting on the edge of the table, eyes flicking back and forth between the sentence and the check. "From now on, please do not contact us anymore. $20,000. It felt like a transaction, a severance package, as if I were an employee being quietly let go after years of unpaid labor. I was 31 years old enough apparently to be dismissed. I thought of all the Christmases that came before, the years when I was a child standing in front of the tree at my parents' house waiting for my father to hand me a gift, while my mother smiled tightly from the sofa. The later years when I came home less often, when phone calls grew shorter, when my questions about family history or finances were met with sighs or silence. The last Christmas we spent together 3 years earlier, when my mother had looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You always make things so complicated." I folded the check back up. My hands were shaking now, a fine tremor I couldn't control. Anger came first, hot and fast. Who did this? Who decided this was acceptable? Then hurt followed heavier, sinking into my ribs, pressing against my lungs. They hadn't even signed their names. I pushed the chair back and stood pacing the length of my apartment. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, then locked it again. I could call them. I could demand an explanation. I could ask what I had done that was so unforgivable it required money and distance to fix. But the sentence was clear. "From now on, please do not contact us anymore." They had drawn a line, and they had paid for it. I stopped in front of the mirror by the door. My face looked pale, older than 31. My eyes were too bright. I pressed my lips together and tried to steady my breathing. There was a familiar voice in my head, my mother's voice saying, "Don't be dramatic." Another voice, my father's, quieter, always quieter, saying, "Let's not make this into a big thing." That was the story of my life. I made things big. They made them disappear. I went back to the table and sat down again. Slowly, deliberately, I smoothed the card flat. I read the sentence again as if repetition might change it. Then I turned the card over. Blank. No explanation hidden on the back. No postscript. I picked up the check and held it between my fingers. $20,000. It was enough to cover my student loans, enough to buy a small used car, enough to disappear if that was what they wanted me to do. A memory surfaced uninvited. Me at 17, sitting across from my parents in the same kitchen I grew up in, asking if they would help me with college applications. My mother had pursed her lips. My father had cleared his throat. "We'll see what we can do," they'd said. Later I learned they had already set aside money, just not for me. That was when I first understood that love in my family came with conditions. Quiet ones, unspoken ones, but conditions all the same. The anger returned sharper, now edged with something else. Resolve. They thought this was the end, a clean break, a way to silence me, to remove me from their lives without mess or confrontation. They thought money could close the door. They were wrong. I took a deep breath and slid the check back into the envelope. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it away. I placed it carefully on the counter next to my phone. If this was the story they wanted to tell, then I would tell mine too. Not by begging, not by pleading, by remembering everything they had forgotten. Outside, the snow kept falling steady and patient. Christmas lights flickered on in the building across the street. Somewhere, someone was laughing. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't look at my parents' number. I searched for a different name. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who knew things. My finger hovered over the screen. If they wanted silence, I thought then they should have been more careful about what they left unsaid. I pressed call. I did not cash the check that night. I laid the envelope on the small kitchen table in my apartment, right next to the chipped ceramic mug I had owned since college. The check sat there like a dare. $20,000 written in neat ink, my name spelled correctly, for once my parents' handwriting unmistakable. They had always prided themselves on clean penmanship. Order, control, lines that never shook. I stared at it until the Christmas lights across the street blinked off one by one. Sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's handwriting again, looping and calm as if she were writing a grocery list instead of cutting her daughter out of her life. From now on, please do not contact us anymore. It was not even cruel in tone. That somehow hurt more. No anger, no explanation, just a decision. In the morning, the apartment felt too quiet. Christmas morning quiet is supposed to be peaceful. This felt hollow. I made coffee and burned the toast because I forgot it was in the toaster. I left it there blackened and smoking because it felt appropriate. I kept thinking there had to be more. My parents did nothing without a reason they believed justified. This was not impulsive. This was planned, discussed, agreed upon over dinners I was no longer invited to. I tried to replay the last year looking for the moment I had crossed some invisible line. I had not asked them for money. Not recently. I had not shown up unannounced. I had not caused a scene at any family event, mostly because I had stopped being invited to those too. Birthdays were suddenly celebrated small. Thanksgivings were quiet this year. Christmases were complicated. Complicated usually meant without me. By late morning, my phone buzzed with a message from a coworker wishing me Merry Christmas. Another from an old friend I barely saw anymore. I replied politely, normally, like someone whose parents had not just paid her to disappear. Around noon, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The balance was low. Rent was due in less than 2 weeks. The promotion I had been promised at work had been delayed again. Budget restructuring, my manager had said, not meeting my eyes. Life was not falling apart, but it was tight. Tight enough that $20,000 could change things. Breathe a little, sleep better. I hated that my parents knew that. I took the check to the bank after lunch, my hands steady, even though my chest felt tight. The teller smiled, wished me happy holidays, and slid the check through without hesitation. No questions, no judgment. The money was pending, but it was already real enough to sting. Walking back to my car, I felt something unexpected, relief, and then shame for feeling it. That night my phone rang. I almost did not answer when I saw my father's number. For a split second, hope flared. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe the card had been my mother's idea. Maybe he was calling to explain, to soften it, to say something like we didn't mean it that way. I answered on the fourth ring. Hello, I said. His voice was calm, measured. The same voice he used when delivering bad news with what he believed was kindness. We saw the check was deposited, he said. No greeting, no Merry Christmas. Yes, I replied. There was a pause. I could hear a television in the background, a football game maybe, life continuing normally on his end. We just wanted to be clear, he said. The money is meant to help you move forward independently, not as an opening for further discussion. My fingers tightened around the phone. Further discussion about what? About us, he meant. About why? About how they could do this. You're an adult, he continued. You've always wanted to do things your own way. This is us respecting that. Respect. The word felt distorted coming from him. So this is it, I said quietly. This is goodbye. I wouldn't frame it like that, he said. We're simply creating boundaries. Boundaries for them, exile for me. What did I do, I asked. Another pause, longer this time. This isn't about one thing, he said. It's about patterns, dependence, emotional strain. Your mother and I need peace. Peace. I pictured my mother setting the table just right, lighting candles, telling herself she had done the compassionate thing. I won't contact you again, I said. You don't have to worry about that. I appreciate your understanding, he replied, relief clear in his voice. We wish you well. And then the line went dead. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after that call. I did not cry right away. I felt numb, like something vital had gone quiet inside me. Later, when the tears came, they were slow and heavy, not dramatic, just grief settling in. But beneath the grief, something else began to take shape. a question I could not ignore. Why now? Why Christmas? Why the money? Why the finality? My parents were careful people, strategic people. If they were cutting me off, it was not just to protect their peace. It was to protect something else. An inheritance, maybe? A will? A decision already made where I no longer fit. I opened my laptop again, not to check my bank account this time, but to search public records, property filings, business registrations, things my father had once explained to me when I was younger before I became inconvenient. I told myself I was just curious, just trying to understand. But deep down I felt it. This was not the end of my story with them. It was the beginning of something they thought I would never have the strength to uncover. I spent the first week after Christmas moving through my apartment like a ghost. The card and the check stayed exactly where I had left them, on the narrow console table by the door. Every time I passed, my eyes flicked to the envelope, as if it might move on its own, as if the words inside could rearrange themselves into something kinder if I just waited long enough. They did not. At night, the city outside my window hummed with leftover holiday energy. Cars rolled by, carrying trees tied to their roofs, lights blinking lazily in windows across the street. I lay awake listening to it all, replaying moments from my childhood I had not thought about in years. My mother standing at the kitchen sink, back straight, voice tight, telling me I needed to learn how to be less sensitive. My father sitting at the dining table, eyes on his newspaper, letting her words land without interruption. Always silence where protection should have been. I told myself I was past this. I was 31 years old with a job I had earned, a life I paid for myself. I did not need their approval. That was the rational voice, the one I used at work, the one that negotiated contracts and deadlines. But there was another voice, smaller and older, that kept asking the same question. Why now? The check was not small. They knew that. They knew exactly how much it would mean to me, how it would confuse things. It was not generosity. It was punctuation. A period at the end of a sentence they had decided was finished. On the 8th day, I finally picked it up. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Inside the check was crisp, impersonal. My name typed neatly, the amount written out in careful script. $20,000 transformed into words that looked almost gentle on the page. $20,000 to disappear. I laughed once, sharp and sudden. The sound startled me. It echoed off the walls of my apartment and fell flat. That afternoon, I called my friend Mara. Mara had known me since my early 20s, back when I was still making excuses for my parents, back when I said things like they mean well, and they had it harder than most. She did not interrupt when I told her about the card. She did not gasp or rush to reassure me. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. That's not a gift, she said finally. That's a transaction. I know. They're buying distance. I know. So what are you going to do? I looked at the check in my hand. Through the window, I could see a couple arguing on the sidewalk below, their breath turning white in the cold air. I don't know yet, I said, but I don't think I'm going to give them what they want. Mara exhaled softly. Good. The next morning, I went to work early. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts stretch out without interruption. I sat at my desk with a cup of burnt coffee and opened my email, trying to focus on routine tasks. That was when I saw the message. It was from an unfamiliar address, but the last name stopped me cold. My mother's maiden name, a name I rarely saw anymore, a name that existed now only in old documents and family trees. The subject line was simple, about the holidays. I stared at it longer than necessary before opening it. The message was polite, almost warm. The sender introduced herself as my aunt, my mother's younger sister. She wrote that she had been thinking about me, that she hoped I was doing well, that she had meant to reach out sooner, but life had a way of getting busy. Near the end, one sentence stood out. I heard there may have been some misunderstandings recently, and I thought perhaps we could talk. Misunderstandings. I leaned back in my chair, heart beating a little faster now. This was new. My parents did not send emissaries unless there was a reason. They preferred control, direct and absolute. I replied with a short message. Polite, neutral. I said I was open to talking. Her response came less than an hour later. She suggested coffee later that week. I spent the rest of the day, distracted, my thoughts looping around possibilities. My aunt had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, the one who watched more than she spoke. As a child, I had liked her because she listened when I talked, really listened, as if my words mattered. By the time Friday came, the check was still uncashed. We met at a small cafe near the river, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. My aunt arrived first. She stood when she saw me, her smile tentative. "You look well," she said. "So do you." We ordered coffee and sat by the window. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. "I'm going to be honest with you. Your parents are not happy that I'm here." I did not smile, but something inside me loosened. "That doesn't surprise me." She nodded. "They believe they've done what's necessary. Clean lines, no complications. And you don't." She wrapped her hands around her cup, staring down into it. "I think they're afraid. And when they're afraid, they try to control the narrative." My chest tightened. Narrative of what? She looked up at me, then really looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I had never seen before. Regret, maybe, or resolve. "Of the family business," she said quietly, "and of what's coming next." The words landed slowly, deliberately. Family business, inheritance. Suddenly the card, the check, the timing of it all shifted into a new shape. I did not interrupt her. She took a breath. "There are things you don't know, things they've worked very hard to keep quiet. And I think they believe that if they cut you off cleanly now, you won't be there later when those things come into the light." My hands were cold. "Why tell me this?" "Because I watched them do the same thing to someone else," she said, "years ago. And I stayed quiet. I don't want to do that again." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady. The city blurred around us. For the first time since Christmas, the hurt shifted into something sharper. Clarity. If my parents thought money could erase me, they had underestimated me. And if they were afraid of what I might see later, then perhaps the real gift they had given me was not the check at all, but the reason to finally stop looking away. As we stood to leave, my aunt touched my arm. "Whatever you decide to do," she said, "don't rush. They've planned this for years. You don't have to." I walked home through the snow with the envelope still in my bag, untouched. Above me, the holiday lights flickered on as dusk settled in. Somewhere between the cafe and my front door, I made my decision. I would take my time, and I would not disappear quietly. By the time January settled in, the world looked clean again. Snow erased footprints. Store windows shed their red ribbons and gold ornaments. People returned unwanted sweaters and tried to forget whatever had happened over Christmas dinner. I did none of that. I kept the card from my parents on my kitchen counter propped against the fruit bowl like a warning sign. I did not frame it. I did not throw it away. I wanted to see it every morning to remind myself that what happened was real. The envelope with the money sat untouched in the drawer beneath it. Friends told me I was overthinking it. They said parents say things they regret. They said the money was proof my parents cared in their own awkward way. They said I should take the cash and move on like everyone else does when family disappoints them. But there was something surgical about that message. From now on, do not bother us. It was not said in anger. It was not written in haste. It was typed, printed, signed by both of them. That was what kept me awake at night. Not the rejection itself, but the calm behind it. I started replaying the years that led to that card. Birthdays forgotten unless I reminded them. Phone calls that went to voicemail and were never returned. Holidays where my presence felt optional. I had learned to excuse it all. They were busy. They had their own problems. I was independent. I did not need much. That story had kept me comfortable. The card destroyed it. On a gray Tuesday morning, while waiting for my coffee to cool, I finally opened the envelope with the money. The check was made out to me, neat and impersonal. The amount was large enough to matter, but small enough to be deliberate. It was not help. It was a transaction, a closing fee. I did not deposit it. Instead, I called the bank where my parents had kept their accounts for as long as I could remember. I did not pretend I was calling about them. I asked about trusts, about custodial accounts, about the kind of financial arrangements parents sometimes set up without telling their children. The woman on the phone spoke kindly, carefully. She did not tell me anything specific. She did not have to. She told me enough to confirm a suspicion I had never allowed myself to name. That afternoon, I called my grandmother. She answered on the third ring, her voice brightening when she heard mine. We talked about the weather, about her hip, about nothing important at all. I waited, feeling like a thief circling a locked room. Then I asked her casually if she remembered when my parents had first moved money around years ago after my college graduation. There was a pause, a long one. She did not answer my question. She asked me why I was asking. I told her the truth. I told her about the card. I told her about the money. I told her that something felt wrong and that I needed to understand what I had apparently agreed to give up. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. She told me she had wondered how long it would take. According to her, there had been a family meeting once a decade earlier that I was not invited to. My parents had framed it as planning, estate planning, practical decisions. They had told her I was doing well, that I did not need involvement, that I preferred independence. They had said it with such confidence that she had believed them, or wanted to. What they did not say was that they were tired of me. Tired of my questions, tired of my presence, reminding them of choices they had made too early and responsibilities they had never wanted. They had chosen distance and disguised it as generosity. There was more, there was always more. My grandmother told me about a trust set up years ago, one that excluded me in all but name, about clauses that could be changed, but only if certain conditions were met, about how my parents had insisted it was fair, about how she had signed papers she did not fully understand because she trusted them. I did not cry while she talked. I felt hollow, like something had been removed cleanly and efficiently. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. The card on the counter no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a signal. They had closed the door because they believed I could not open it again. They were wrong. That night I deposited the check. Not because I needed the money, because I wanted the record. I wanted proof that they had initiated this exchange. I wanted a paper trail that showed they believed this payment concluded something between us. It was the first move in a game they did not know they were playing. Over the next weeks, I did not call them. I did not text. I did not respond to the polite, distant messages my mother sent after seeing the check clear. Hope you received it. Take care. I saved every one. Instead, I called a lawyer. I did not tell him a dramatic story. I told him facts, dates, amounts, documents. He listened, asked careful questions, and then leaned back in his chair. He told me something important. He told me that exclusion often leaves fingerprints, that people who think they are being tidy usually leave a mess behind. That family arrangements made quietly can unravel loudly if someone finally looks at them closely. I walked out of his office feeling something new. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. My parents thought Christmas had ended our relationship. They thought the money was enough to buy silence distance relief. They believed I would disappear the way I always had when things became uncomfortable. They had mistaken my quiet for surrender. And as January faded into February, I began to prepare for the moment when they would realize that the story they told themselves was about to be rewritten. By the time January arrived, the $20,000 no longer felt like money. It felt like evidence. I hadn't touched it, not a cent. It sat in a separate account I opened specifically so I wouldn't accidentally spend it. Every time I logged in and saw the balance, my chest tightened, not because I needed it, but because I finally understood what it represented. A transaction. My parents hadn't sent that money to help me. They had sent it to erase me. Once that realization settled in, everything else began to rearrange itself in my mind. Memories I had filed away as awkward or painful suddenly made sense when viewed through a different lens. The forgotten birthdays, the last-minute Christmas invitations that always came with conditions, the way my mother's voice changed whenever I talked about my plans, my work, my independence. I wasn't the disappointment they tolerated. I was the loose end they meant to cut. That was the week I met Eleanor Price. She was my grandmother's old friend, or at least that's how I remembered her. I hadn't seen her in years. She was well into her 70s now, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed, the kind of woman who made age look like authority instead of decline. She reached out after hearing through a chain of people I couldn't trace that I was having family trouble. We met for coffee at a quiet place near the river. Eleanor arrived early, already seated, hands folded around her cup. "I won't waste your time," she said, after we exchanged pleasantries. "Your parents are not as careful as they think." I felt my spine straighten. About what? She studied my face for a long moment. About money and about history. I didn't interrupt. "Your grandmother," Eleanor continued, "was very specific about her wishes, more specific than your parents ever admitted." My breath caught. "You knew her will." "I helped her draft parts of it," she said calmly. "Not the legal language, the intent." I stared at her. "My parents told me everything went to them." Eleanor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They would." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. Not documents, notes, letters. Handwritten pages I recognized instantly. My grandmother's handwriting. I felt suddenly unsteady. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I promised her I would if certain things happened," Eleanor said. "And they have." She slid one letter across the table. I didn't touch it right away. The paper looked fragile, like something that carried weight simply by existing. "Your grandmother anticipated this," Eleanor said quietly. "She worried your parents would try to control the narrative, control you." I finally picked up the letter. My hands trembled as I read. It was dated years ago, addressed to me, never sent. In it, my grandmother wrote about fairness, about independence, about how she saw in me a strength my parents misunderstood and feared. She mentioned a trust, not large by their standards, but meaningful, designed to activate when I reached a certain age and demonstrated self-sufficiency. That age had already passed. I swallowed hard. "Where is it?" Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. "That depends on whether your parents honored the terms or found a way around them." My pulse pounded. "You think they hid it?" "I think," she said carefully, "that the money they sent you was not generosity. It was preemptive." That night I didn't sleep. I reread the letter over and over, memorizing the shape of the words, the way my grandmother's voice came through the page. For the first time since Christmas, I cried, not from humiliation or rejection, but from recognition. Someone had seen me. The next morning I called David Klein. He listened without interrupting as I explained Eleanor the letter, the trust. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "This changes things." "How much?" I asked. "Enough that your parents should be nervous," he replied. We scheduled a formal records request. Quietly, methodically. No accusations yet, just facts. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't return the money. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I waited. 2 weeks later, my mother called. Her tone was unusually soft. "We've been thinking," she said, "about what we wrote. Maybe it came across harsher than intended." I pictured her rehearsing that line in front of a mirror. She continued, "We hope you're using the money wisely." There it was. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I haven't used it at all." Silence. "Why not?" she asked. "Because," I said evenly, "I'm still deciding what it cost." Another pause. Then carefully, "What do you mean by that?" I replied, "Some gifts come with fine print." She laughed lightly. Too lightly. "Don't be dramatic." After we hung up, David forwarded me an email. Preliminary findings, inconsistencies, missing disclosures. Not proof yet, but enough to know I wasn't imagining things. That evening, I transferred the $20,000 into a certified account flagged untouched. If my parents thought they had paid for my silence, they had misunderstood me completely. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to confront them yet. I was going to let the truth surface on its own terms. And when it did, the money would still be sitting there, waiting to be returned. By the time January settled in, the city looked stripped down and honest. Christmas lights were gone. Trees stood bare. There was no music piped into stores pretending everything was warm and forgiving. I liked it that way. It matched how I felt inside. Clear, focused, done pretending. The money was still in my account. I had not touched it. Not $1. Not because I was conflicted, but because I was deliberate. $20,000 was not a gift. It was a message, a transaction, a line drawn in ink, not emotion. From now on, do not bother us anymore. The more distance I had from that sentence, the more I understood what it really meant. It was not about peace. It was about control. They wanted closure on their terms with a receipt. I refused to give them that. Instead, I used the silence to work. My consulting firm had survived December by sheer will and caffeine. January was when the real test came. Clients returned from holidays with sharper expectations and shorter patience. I delivered anyway. I landed 2 contracts back-to-back, both with companies that had been passed over by larger firms. Companies that liked how direct I was, how I did not waste time. One afternoon, after a meeting ran long, my phone buzzed with a number I had not saved, but recognized immediately. My mother. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, a voicemail appeared. I did not listen to it right away. I finished my notes, shut down my laptop, and walked home through the cold, letting my breath fog the air. Only once I was inside Coat Off Kettle On did I press play. Her voice sounded irritated, not worried. "We need to clarify something," she said. "That money was meant to help you move on, not to sit there unused. You're not making some kind of point, are you?" I almost laughed. They had cut me off, told me not to contact them, and now they were annoyed that I had not responded correctly to Exile. I did not call back. Instead, I called someone else. His name was Peter Lowell, estate attorney, mid-50s, known for being precise and unimpressed by theatrics. I had met him once through a client referral months earlier and kept his card because something about him had felt solid. He agreed to meet the next day. His office was quiet in the way serious offices are. No inspirational posters, no fake smiles, just files and order. I told him everything. The card, the message, the money, the years leading up to it. When I finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. "You understand?" He said slowly that sending money with a message like that can be interpreted legally. How, I asked. "As a severance," he replied, "as an attempt to establish no further obligation." My jaw tightened. "Can they do that?" "Anyone can try," he said. "Whether it holds depends on context, history, intent." He paused. "Do your parents have assets?" "Yes." "Significant?" "Yes." "Other children?" "No." That got his attention. "No siblings," he repeated, "and they chose to send you money to make you go away." I nodded. He tapped a pen against his desk. "Have they ever mentioned a will?" "Vaguely, always as something private." He nodded again. "Privacy is often the first layer of secrecy." He explained things carefully. Trust structures, conditional inheritances, how estrangement could be manufactured to justify exclusion, how money sent now could later be framed as an advance or settlement. "And what do you want?" he asked finally. I did not answer right away. What did I want? I did not want their money. Not really. I wanted acknowledgement, accountability. I wanted them to understand that you cannot erase a child with a check and call it dignity. "I want the truth documented," I said, "and I want options." He smiled faintly. "That can be arranged." Over the next few weeks, we gathered information quietly. Public records, corporate filings, trust registrations linked to my parents' names. It was slow, unglamorous work. But piece by piece, a picture formed. They had assets set aside. Not just savings, but a family holding company established years earlier. Quiet, profitable, designed to pass smoothly to the next generation. And I was not listed anywhere. Not as beneficiary, not a successor, not even as a contingency. I stared at the documents spread across Peter's desk, feeling something strange rise in me. Not shock. Confirmation. "They planned this," I said. "Yes," Peter replied, "long before Christmas." That night I went home and finally touched the money. Not to spend it, to move it. I opened a separate account and transferred the full amount untouched into escrow under Peter's guidance. Documented, noted, protected. A message without words. You do not get to decide the ending alone. The next morning my father emailed me. Short, direct. "We hear you've involved a lawyer. This is unnecessary." I stared at the screen, calm as glass. Then I replied, "Silence was your choice, clarity is mine." I did not send anything else. But I knew something they did not. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. And the moment they realized, that would be the moment the balance shifted. By the time January settled in, I understood something I hadn't before. The letter wasn't just an ending. It was a move. My parents had never done anything impulsively. Every gift, every silence, every disappointment had always served a purpose I only understood years later. The Christmas card with the money wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was strategy. They wanted closure on their terms, clean hands, a receipt that proved they had been generous. That was the part that stayed with me. They didn't want me gone. They wanted me quiet. I realized this on a gray Tuesday morning while sitting in my car outside a modest office building in a neighboring town. The sign on the door read simply, "Law Offices of Richard Hale." I had circled the block twice before parking, heart pounding harder than it had at any point since Christmas. Richard Hale was not someone my parents would have chosen. That alone made him perfect. He was older, sharp-eyed, with a voice that carried the weight of decades spent listening carefully. When I handed him the Christmas card, the note and the cashier's check, he didn't react the way people usually did. No raised eyebrows, no sympathetic sigh. He read everything twice. Then he looked at me and asked a question that stopped me cold. "Did you cash it?" "Yes," I said, "the same day." "Good," he replied. "That tells me something." I leaned forward. "What?" "That they expected you to," he said calmly, "and that they believe money settles obligation." The word obligation landed heavily. I told him everything. The years of being the inconvenient child, the missed birthdays, the way my parents praised independence, when it meant my silence and generosity when it benefited my siblings. I told him about the family business I was never invited into, despite having the background for it. I told him about Christmases, where my gifts were practical, while others received symbolic gestures of love. When I finished, Richard leaned back in his chair. "You're not asking how to get revenge," he said. "You're asking how to reclaim narrative control." I swallowed. "Is there a difference?" "There's a big one," he said. "Revenge burns hot and fast. Control lasts." That was when he asked about my grandmother. I hadn't thought about her in years, not consciously. She had died when I was still in college, long before the family fracture became undeniable. She was the only one who had ever noticed when I went quiet at dinner, the only one who asked questions and waited for real answers. She owned the original shares of the company, Richard said, flipping through documents I hadn't known how to read. She placed them in a trust. The language is specific, very specific. I felt my chest tighten. Specific how? She created conditions, he replied. Conditions that required fairness among heirs, transparency, annual disclosures. And did those happen, I asked. He met my eyes. That's what we're going to find out. For the first time since Christmas, my anger sharpened into something focused. That week, I started documenting everything. Every message from my parents, every check they had sent over the years, every time money was used as punctuation instead of conversation. I stopped deleting old emails. I stopped minimizing my own reactions. I also stopped reaching out. That silence unsettled them. My mother called twice in 1 week, left a voicemail that was overly cheerful, asking if I had landed on my feet yet. My father sent a short email asking me to confirm receipt of some tax-related paperwork. It was the first time in years he had contacted me directly. I didn't respond. Instead, I followed Richard's instructions. I requested documents. I asked formal questions. I sent letters through proper channels. Nothing hostile, nothing emotional, just precise. That was when my sister reached out. She called late one night, her voice already defensive. "Why are you digging around?" she asked. "You got the money. Isn't that enough?" I closed my eyes. Enough for what? "For closure," she said. "You always make things complicated." "No," I replied quietly. "You just benefit from them being simple." There was a long silence. "You're going to ruin things," she finally said. I thought of the Christmas card, the neat handwriting, the careful phrasing. "Don't make things harder. Don't make us uncomfortable." "I didn't start this," I said, "but I'm done pretending it didn't hurt." She hung up. By the end of the month, Richard had what he needed. Enough inconsistencies, enough missing disclosures, enough evidence that my parents had interpreted generosity as permission to rewrite rules. "They assumed you wouldn't look," he said. "They assumed wrong." That night, I sat alone in my apartment holding the Christmas card again. It felt different now, smaller, less powerful. They thought $20,000 was the price of my absence. They didn't realize it was the down payment on my clarity. And clarity, I was learning, was far more dangerous than anger. The letter had closed one door, but it had opened another. And in the next room, the truth was waiting. By the time January settled in, the silence from my parents had become a presence of its own. Not loud, not dramatic, just absolute. No calls, no emails, no accidental texts meant for someone else. It was as if the Christmas card had done exactly what it was designed to do, erase me cleanly, efficiently, with a bow on top. And yet their money was still sitting in my account. I hadn't touched it. Not because I was conflicted, not because I was waiting for permission. I hadn't touched it because I wanted to understand it first. Money, I had learned, was never just money in families like mine. It was language, control, a leash disguised as generosity. Every morning I opened my banking app and stared at the number. $20,000 spelled out in cold digits. It hadn't moved. I hadn't let it. Instead, I had been busy elsewhere. The nonprofit board meeting was held in a narrow conference room above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and burnt coffee. Folding chairs, cheap projector, passionate people who didn't pretend to be anything else. I sat quietly at the table listening as they debated funding priorities and long-term sustainability. This was the world my parents had always dismissed. Too idealistic, too small, too noisy with people who mattered but didn't have money. I spoke only once, carefully suggesting a restructuring of their donor outreach, a way to leverage storytelling instead of pressure. Heads turned, pens paused. After the meeting, the executive director pulled me aside. "You've done this before," she said. I smiled. "Something like it." She didn't ask where I came from. She didn't ask why I cared. She just asked if I'd help. That night, I walked home through streets still crusted with dirty snow, my boots crunching with every step. The air burned my lungs in a way that felt clean, honest. For the first time since Christmas, I slept without dreaming of my parents' handwriting. 3 days later, my father broke the silence. He didn't call, he emailed. The subject line read clarification. It was one word, neutral and bureaucratic, the kind he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while saying something cruel. The message itself was short. "We assumed the check arrived safely. We trust you will use it wisely. This is not an invitation to reopen old conversations. Please respect our boundaries as we are respecting yours." I read it twice, then a third time slower. There it was again, the framing. They were the ones setting boundaries. They were the calm adults. I was the problem child who needed to be managed with distance and money. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall. Something in me finally clicked. They didn't expect gratitude. They expected obedience. They expected the money to buy my silence. That realization was oddly freeing. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with David. He listened as I explained the email, the check, the timing. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. You know, he said, in cases like this, money is often used to create a paper trail of generosity. It protects them. From what I asked. From accountability, he replied. From the story being told any other way. I nodded. That tracked. What would you do, I asked. He considered. If it were me, I'd decide what story I want told. Then I'd act accordingly. On my walk back to the office, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. A voicemail. I almost deleted it without listening. Almost. Her voice was measured, carefully warm. We heard through a mutual contact that you've been getting involved in community work. That's admirable. Just be careful not to misrepresent family matters publicly. Privacy is important to us. I laughed out loud on the sidewalk, startling a man walking his dog. They were watching. That night, I finally touched the money. Not to spend it, to move it. I transferred the full amount into a separate account, one designated solely for a purpose I had decided on weeks ago. I documented everything. Dates, times, copies of the card, screenshots of the email. I kept it clean, transparent. If money told a story, mine would be precise. At the next nonprofit meeting, I made an announcement. I'd like to make an anonymous contribution, I said, in full. No recognition, no naming rights. The room went quiet. The executive director blinked. That's significant. It's not mine, I said, but I'm responsible for where it goes. She nodded slowly, understanding more than I had said. When I got home, I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone rang that evening. Lauren. I hadn't heard from her since Christmas. Is it true, she asked without preamble? Is what true, I replied. That you donated the money? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. They're furious. I smiled to myself. Why, I asked. They said it made them look bad, she said. Like they were trying to buy you off. And were they? I asked. Another pause. I don't know anymore, she admitted. After we hung up, I sat on my couch, staring at the blank television screen. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Clarity. They could no longer use their money to control the narrative. They had tried to close a door quietly. Instead, they had given me a key. And now they were realizing they didn't like where it opened. The next move would be theirs. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting. I was ready. By the time Christmas decorations started coming down around town, the silence from my parents had become louder than any argument we had ever had. No calls, no emails, no accidental texts meant for someone else. Just the card, the money, and the sentence that had quietly rewritten my place in their lives. From now on, do not disturb us anymore. I had replayed those words so many times they felt carved into my chest. Not shouted, not angry, final. As if I had been dismissed from a job I never applied for but worked at my entire life. And yet something strange had happened since then. I was standing straighter. It wasn't confidence. Not yet. It was distance. Emotional distance creates space, and space lets you see patterns clearly. And once I stepped back, I started noticing how much of my life had been shaped by their approval without my consent. That realization hurt more than the rejection itself. The real shift came on a gray Wednesday afternoon when my attorney called. His voice was careful, measured, the way people sound when they know they are about to change the direction of your life. I finally received the full accounting, he said, not just what they disclosed, everything. I closed my laptop and sat down. What does everything mean, I asked. It means, he replied, your parents have been moving assets for years. Quietly, strategically, and not all of it went where they claimed. I waited. They used your name, he continued as a buffer, in several transactions. My stomach dropped. What kind of transactions? Corporate filings, trust transfers, liability shields. On paper, you were listed as a secondary beneficiary and in some cases a guarantor, but you were never informed. I felt cold. Why would they do that? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was firm. Because if anything went wrong, exposure would not land on them first. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. All those years, I thought I was the irresponsible one, the unstable one, the child who needed managing, and all along they had quietly positioned me as a safety net they never planned to warn. Am I legally at risk? I asked. Yes, he said, but also no, because they made a mistake. I closed my eyes. What mistake? They underestimated how thorough the records would be, he said, and they underestimated you. That night I didn't sleep, not because of fear, because of clarity. I thought about every time they called me dramatic, every time they told relatives I was sensitive, every time my boundaries were framed as immaturity. It all served a purpose. Discrediting me made it easier to use me. The next day, I drove past their neighborhood. I hadn't planned to. My hands just turned the wheel without asking permission. I parked across the street, engine running, watching their house from a distance. The lights were on. A wreath still hung crooked on the door. Everything looked peaceful. I realized something then. They believed the story was over. They thought the money was closure, a transaction to erase obligation, a clean ending where they walked away with their reputation intact and I disappeared quietly. They had no idea the story was just beginning. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I started preparing. I gathered documentation, emails, voicemails, statements. I cataloged conversations where they had instructed me to sign things without explanation. I cross-referenced dates. Patterns emerged quickly once I stopped protecting them in my own mind. The hardest part was accepting one truth. They hadn't cut me off because I was a burden. They cut me off because I was becoming a liability they could no longer control. A week later, I received an unexpected invitation. A family friend, someone who had known my parents since before I was born, reached out asking if I would attend a small New Year gathering. Casual, no pressure. I almost declined. Then I realized why it mattered. This wasn't about confrontation, it was about visibility. I said yes. The night of the gathering, I dressed carefully, not flashy, not defensive, calm, composed, unremarkable in the way that makes people listen instead of judge. My parents were there. They froze when they saw me. Not anger, not embarrassment. Fear. My mother recovered first. She smiled tightly and approached me like someone greeting a stranger at a funeral. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "I was invited," I replied. My father didn't speak. He studied my face the way gamblers study a table when the odds shift unexpectedly. We didn't argue, we didn't raise our voices. But something had changed. Other people noticed. They noticed the distance, the tension, the way my parents avoided certain conversations when I joined a group. They noticed how carefully I spoke, how calmly I answered questions about my work, my life, my plans. And they noticed something else. I was no longer asking for anything. No approval, no explanation, no reconciliation. That absence made them uneasy. Later that night, as I was leaving, my father stopped me near the door. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "About what you think you know." I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said, "about what you think I don't." I walked out before he could respond. In my car, heart steady, I understood the next phase of this story would not be loud. It would be precise. Because the most powerful revenge isn't humiliation. It's exposure. And soon, the truth they buried would surface exactly where they least expected it to. By the time January settled in, the silence from my parents had become louder than any argument we ever had. No calls, no emails, no forwarded articles with passive-aggressive notes attached, just absence. At first, I kept expecting it to break. I would catch myself checking my phone after meetings or glancing at my inbox before bed, half convinced there would be a message that said something like, "We need to talk," or "This has gone too far." Nothing came. What did come, however, was movement. Quiet, strategic movement. The kind that only happens when decisions have already been made behind closed doors. I learned that the hard way on a gray Monday morning when I received an unexpected calendar invite. No message, no explanation, just a subject line that made my stomach drop. Family Trust Review. The sender was an attorney I had never met. I stared at the screen for a full minute before clicking accept. The meeting took place over video, which somehow made it worse. I watched my own face in the corner of the screen as I waited, reminding myself to sit straight, breathe evenly, and not react too quickly. When the attorney joined, he introduced himself politely and launched into formalities. Then my parents appeared on the screen, seated together in what looked like their home office. My mother wore pearls. My father looked tired but composed. Neither of them smiled. "Thank you for making time," the attorney said. "This meeting is to ensure all parties are aligned moving forward." Aligned, that word again. I didn't speak at first. I wanted to hear how they would frame this. I wanted to know whether they would pretend nothing had happened, or acknowledge the Christmas card that still sat in my desk drawer, folded and unfolded, so many times the edges were soft. My father cleared his throat. "We've decided to restructure certain arrangements." My mother nodded. "This isn't personal." It was always personal. The attorney explained that adjustments had been made to long-term plans involving the family business, a holding company I hadn't even known existed under that name. Assets were being consolidated, responsibilities clarified, future beneficiaries identified. Then he said the word, "excluded." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't said with anger or cruelty. It was delivered like a line item on a spreadsheet. Given the circumstances, he continued, Anna will no longer be considered an active participant or future beneficiary. I felt the air leave my lungs even though I had suspected this for months. My mother finally looked directly at me. We thought the money we sent was generous. A clean break. A clean break. As if you could sever blood with a check. I surprised myself by laughing softly, not because it was funny, but because something inside me finally snapped into clarity. You sent me hush money, I said. My father's jaw tightened. We sent you closure. No, I replied calmly. You sent yourselves permission. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't expected this to turn emotional, but this wasn't emotion anymore. This was reckoning. You know, I said, what hurts the most isn't the money. It's that you thought I'd take it quietly. My mother inhaled sharply. We're done being manipulated. That word again, manipulation. It was always their shield. I never asked for your money, I said. You sent it, with instructions. That tells me everything. The meeting ended shortly after that. No raised voices, no dramatic exits, just polite goodbyes and a screen going dark. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at my reflection in the blank monitor. I expected rage, or grief, or at least the familiar ache of rejection. What I felt instead was resolve, because here was the truth they didn't know. While they had been closing doors, I had been opening files. While they had been consolidating assets, I had been tracing histories. The family business they believed I was ignorant of was built on a foundation they preferred to forget, one that involved my grandmother, her original capital, her signature, her conditions that had never been fulfilled. I met with my own attorney later that week, a woman my age, sharp and unflinching. She had already reviewed the documents I sent. They assumed you wouldn't look, she said simply. They assumed I wouldn't fight, I replied. She nodded. They're wrong. There was a clause buried deep in the original trust agreement, one that required transparency with all direct descendants upon material changes, a clause that had been ignored, not accidentally, deliberately, which meant their clean break was legally messy, very messy. I didn't tell my parents any of this. I let them believe they had succeeded. I let them believe I had been bought off. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't confrontation. It's patience. By the end of the month, formal notices were sent, not from me but from the court. Requests for documentation, clarification of intent, verification of authority. My father called me for the first time in weeks. Did you do this? He demanded. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, letting his voice echo unanswered. Then I brought it back. I didn't do anything I said. I just stopped staying silent. He hung up without another word. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window watching snow fall over the city. Christmas decorations were still up in some apartments, stubborn lights clinging to the idea of warmth. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who kept trying to earn love, the one who believed proximity meant belonging. That girl would have begged. This woman was done asking. They thought the story ended with a card and a check. They were wrong. It was only reaching the part where the truth starts to surface. And once it does, nothing stays buried for long. I didn't sleep the night after the hearing, not because I was afraid of losing. That fear had already burned itself out weeks ago. What kept me awake was the strange quiet that follows a storm you survived, the part where your body still expects thunder but the sky has already moved on. Outside my apartment window, Christmas lights blinked on neighboring balconies. Red, green, gold. The city was easing into celebration while I lay on my couch fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word my parents had said under oath, especially my mother. When the judge asked her why she sent the card and the money, she paused for too long. Her fingers trembled. She looked at my father like she always did when she wanted him to rescue her. But this time he didn't. She said, "We thought it would be cleaner." Cleaner, as if I were a stain. The memory made my chest tighten, but it didn't break me the way it once would have. Something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't trying to earn their love anymore. I was standing in my own truth, and that truth had teeth. At 7 the next morning, my phone buzzed. A text from David. We won. I read it 3 times. Then I sat up, swung my feet to the floor, and laughed. Not a triumphant laugh, not a bitter one. Just a quiet release, like air finally leaving lungs that had been clenched for years. The ruling was precise and devastating. The trust amendment that excluded me was deemed invalid due to coercion and concealment. My grandmother's original intent stood. The family business shares that had been quietly redirected back to my parents were ordered to be restructured. I was legally reinstated as an equal beneficiary. Not favored, equal. The court also noted something else. The money they sent me. The $20,000. It was classified as an attempt to induce silence. That phrase mattered more than the dollar amount ever could. By noon, my phone was exploding. Lauren called first. I didn't answer. Then came messages from cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. Aunts suddenly checking in. An uncle asking if I wanted to talk things through. I muted all of it. At 3 p.m, there was a knock at my door. I already knew who it was. My parents stood in the hallway, coats still on, faces drawn tight like they had aged 10 years since Christmas. My father spoke first. Can we come in? I looked at them for a long moment. This was the man who had taught me to ride a bike. The woman who had brushed my hair before school. The same people who had decided in a neat little envelope that I was disposable. No, I said, we can talk here. My mother swallowed. You didn't have to take it this far. I almost smiled. You sent me money to disappear, I replied. This is exactly how far it goes. My father's voice cracked. We were trying to protect the family. From what I asked, me existing, they had no answer. That silence told me everything. I'm not here to punish you, I said calmly. I'm here to set boundaries. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We're still your parents. Yes, I said, and that's the tragedy. I told them I would communicate only through legal channels from now on. No surprise visits, no emotional appeals, no rewriting history. When they left, my hands shook. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from the weight of finally saying what I had swallowed my entire life. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk. I opened a new document, a resignation letter. Not from a job, from a role. The role of the daughter who absorbs everything so others can stay comfortable. I also drafted something else, a proposal. The family business had a dormant division. One my grandmother had started decades ago focused on community development. It had been sidelined after her death because it wasn't profitable enough. I knew better. Within days, I presented a plan to the board. Modernized, ethical, sustainable, profitable without exploitation. They approved it unanimously. The irony was almost poetic. The very business my parents used to control me was now the platform I used to step fully into myself. A week later, Lauren showed up alone. She looked smaller somehow. I didn't know, she said immediately. About the trust, about the card. I studied her face. The fear, the guilt, the relief that it wasn't her this time. You benefited from not knowing, I replied gently. She nodded. I'm sorry. I believe you, I said, but I'm still changing the relationship. She blinked. What does that mean? It means I stop pretending we're equals when we're not, I said. And I stop competing for love that's conditional. She left quietly. That night I stood by my window again watching snow begin to fall. Soft, clean, covering everything without erasing it. I realized something then. Revenge wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the ruling. It wasn't even the money. Revenge was becoming someone they could no longer control, dismiss, or buy off. And the final step of that transformation was still ahead. Because winning wasn't the end. It was the beginning of deciding what I would do with the power they never thought I deserved. And that choice would change all of our lives forever. Christmas came again exactly 1 year later. This time I did not wait for a card. I did not check the mailbox with a knot in my stomach or flinch when my phone buzzed. I had learned something important over the past year. Silence when chosen is power. And I had finally chosen mine. The morning light spilled across my living room as I poured coffee and looked out the window at a quiet street dusted with snow. The tree in the corner was simple, no excess, no forced cheer, just light, steady, and warm. I thought about the woman I had been 12 months earlier, standing in the doorway holding an envelope like it might explode, reading words that erased her place in her own family, trying to understand how love could be reduced to a transaction and dismissal wrapped together. I understood it now. It was never about me. My parents had spent their lives managing appearances, control, and fear. Fear of conflict, fear of accountability, fear of a daughter who refused to stay small. When they realized they could not shape me anymore, they chose distance disguised as generosity. And I had let them believe that worked. The truth they never saw was this. The money they sent did not buy my silence. It funded my clarity. Over the year that followed, everything changed quietly. The trust documents became public record after my grandmother's estate review concluded. My parents were forced into disclosures they had never expected. The family business entered a restructuring phase under scrutiny from partners who did not appreciate manipulation hidden behind tradition. My parents did not lose everything. They lost control. Invitations stopped coming. Phone calls grew awkward. People began asking questions that could not be waved away with charm or checks. The story they had told about me unraveled when it no longer matched the facts. I never confronted them. I did not need to. Distance did what arguments never could. I heard about them through others, about the tension, about the strain, about the quiet panic that set in when they realized the daughter they dismissed was no longer available as a scapegoat or a fallback. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Merry Christmas. We hope you are well. If you would like to talk, we are open." I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, no accountability, just an invitation framed to make it seem generous. I set the phone face down on the table. Some doors close softly, others close with intention. I had spent years chasing explanations, validation, fairness. I had believed closure came from confrontation. I was wrong. Closure came when I stopped asking people to see me who benefited from not seeing me at all. That evening, I hosted a small dinner. Friends, chosen family, people who knew my story, not as gossip, but as context. We laughed, we shared food, we spoke about plans and hopes, not wounds. At one point, someone asked me if I ever regretted not responding, not returning the money, not demanding an apology. I smiled. "No," I said, because the best revenge wasn't payback. It was peace. Later, as the night quieted and snow began to fall again, I sat alone by the window with the lights dimmed. I thought about how betrayal reshapes you, how injustice forces a reckoning with your own worth. I had learned that boundaries are not punishments. They are definitions. I had learned that silence can be an answer. And I had learned that being excluded from something toxic is not rejection. It is release. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, hear this clearly. You do not owe access to people who trade love for leverage. You do not have to earn your place in a family that only values compliance. Sometimes the moment they try to discard you is the moment you step into yourself fully. If this story resonated with you, if you have lived a version of this quiet betrayal and survived it, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters. And if you want more stories like this, stories about truth, karma, and tables turned, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because the truth they tried to hide always finds its way into the light.